All right. That does remind me, do some serious editing before this goes online. Okay, here we go. Right, so stop video. I can just start. Oh, let's just start. Okay. Did you hear last week? Sure, you were here.
Yeah,
okay, it's just the two of you were on Zoom. Very okay. So let me just remind you. We talked before about two Yetzahoras. We talked about the one that's a Malach, getting you to do things. That was Thros Lanter, your own Yetzahora, etc. But last week we talked about a different sort of Yetzahora, which is a Shpos, a Sviva. And the Rambam had written, and it's in trying to remember it right this week. Vov Aleph, that it's just the nature of the person to be affected by his environment. It just does it to you. You just can't not be it. And he says, if your environment is going to destroy you, just move to a different environment. Move to a different place. Move to a different, go into a different show, a different town, a city, a different country, etc., etc. And Rabbi Yerucham had said that this is something that you could go through your entire life, 70 years of your life, without addressing properly, because the Yetzirah does not allow you to seriously address the things that are crucial to you. And if you do, it'll only let you think about it to the slightest degree without you going into it, in incredible detail. Right, so let's see where we can go from there. I think that's more or less what we got up to last time. So Rav Solomon, in his Sefer Matnas Chaim, in the Chelik on Moedim. So if it's in Moedim, and therefore how does that relate to this theme? Of course, he was talking about Chanukah. So he quotes that Rambam, which in turn he's quoting from Reb Yerucham. Both obviously knew the Rambam inside out. But he writes the following thing. So the Rambam has said it's impossible not to be affected by your environment. He says, if it's the case of human nature to want to do what all the guys are doing, right? Then, and incidentally, that sort of like puts Dina's going out to see what's happening in the world, what the girls are wearing, right? If somebody talked about the Sifa they had online, or from Good Israel, Etzes Gedoli, America had a whole big thing online this week about the situation that we're in at the moment. And somebody inevitably talked about what the Noda B'Yehuda said, that we're building two big houses in his time in Prague. The houses are too big, and that itself elicits the kina of the non-Jewish world. And he says there, which is a shocking, astonishing thing, how that the non-Jewish ladies, the lords and ladies, the ladies used to come to the Jewish quarter of Prague to look at how the Jewish women were dressed, to see what were the latest fashions.
Oh my.
Not good. Because the latest fashions, you're affected. We're in Golos, and it has to affect us. It does affect us. So he says, Rambam says, you follow after. And Dina went out to see the fashions. Dina went out to see what the non-Jewish girls are wearing. Of course, you get kidnapped and raped and all that sort of stuff. But this is an old story of being affected by the environment that you're in. You are, it's human nature to, as it were, I suppose because it's in the nature of people, we are gregarious by nature. We like contact and friendship by nature. We can't live without it. What's the Gemara saying in Tanis Kaf Gimel? Give me chavrusa or misusa. If I don't have friends, then give me death. If I don't have that, we're such sociable beings. But society, which is good because it keeps us healthy, but it can have a negative effect as well, which is interesting. I had a shaila not too long ago from somebody in the Five Towns whose brother is married out. And so the brother got in touch with this person to say, completely out of the blue, do you think whatever the woman's name is good for me? Let's say Christine. And so she phoned to ask to tell me what she said, and asked what did I think of this. The interesting thing was that the brother has suffered from mental illness all his life, and this, as she put it, she's surprised he's still alive, from which I assume there have been several suicide attempts. And at that point, there's a very interesting shaila what to do if this woman is good for him, and if he's mentally unstable, then the real question is, and I don't know, this would take, yes, the Pekut Nefesh Shaila. It's a big shaila to answer. And I've had this before. If somebody is seriously met, there's, in England it's called Witch magazine, not witch as in Halloween coming up, but which here it's called Consumer Reports, where they contrast and compare. So there's a famous Scottish comedian called Billy Connolly. Never look him up, incidentally. But anyway, Billy Connolly. It's also highly intelligent, like most funny people.
Time you let me know what it's all about, right?
So ignore that. And he said, if you were to contrast, if Consumer Reports was, because of course you compare cars and you compare vacuum cleaners, etc. If there was to do a comparison on the world's religions, Judaism would come out the worst. So many restrictions, so many things you have to do, so many places you can't go, so many things you can't eat, etc. From a non-Jewish point of view, it would come out the worst. Which, I mean, there's obviously a point in that. And quite seriously, somebody who is mentally ill, then Judaism is certainly the worst place to be. It's terrible. And if somebody suffers from OCD, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Yeah. Ramat Asiyahu told me many years ago about a Bach in Yeshiva who the phrase he used was, he hated his tefillin. I don't think it's disrespectful to my great Rebbe Ramat Asiyahu to say that he probably wasn't aware of that this is a condition, OCD, because I'd never heard of OCD in those days. I don't think it was, maybe it's like peanut allergy, but I grew up, nobody had peanut allergy. Maybe nobody had OCD, maybe it's just an evolution of a particularly troubled society. But if you suffer from OCD, then this boy hated his tefillin. He obsessed about the tefillin, or the Parshias kosher, or the batting squares, etc., etc., etc. And he just anyway. So basically, if somebody's suffering from mental illness, then really, what do you do? Basically, I think you more or less carte blanche to ignore everything. If the Torah, because the Apostle says the Torah is given to live by the mitzvahs, but if the mitzvahs are going to kill you because you're mentally ill, then are you allowed to? Should you keep the mitzvahs?
When teenage boys are going through drug treatment withdrawal, there's a place in Florida which is very popular, but they don't serve kosher there.
Right.
And all they're going to say, go there.
Yeah,
Go there.
I think it's the same thing.
Your job now is to get healthy.
That's right.
When you come back, we'll worry about Shmir Shabbos.
Yeah. Well, it's like a physical illness that threatens your life. I mean, if they were told you to take some drug that was made from pig fat or something like that, but it's going to save your life, then of course you should take it. What's the shaila? Anyway, so basically, so what happens? So there's this strange balance. That story rather illustrates it. A strange balance between doing the normal human social interaction thing, which you need to survive. I mean, I've told you before the Nazis, by experimentation on Jewish babies in Auschwitz, when brand new babies were born, they were fed and they were clothed. They were denied nothing except one thing, which was cuddles, hugs and cuddles. A human baby denied hugs and cuddles dies. And of course, if you take a human being and put him or her in solitary confinement, they usually go mad. So we're so innately gregarious, we're so innately social animals that denied society, we go mad. We simply go insane, or we die. So this guy's in an interesting situation, right? This woman, I don't know all the details. Let's assume that she's keeping him sane. Is she like the non-kosher drug? This is a shadow for Godel. It's certainly not why Rubinstein's pay grade, this one. But my gut reaction is there might well be a heter to sort of like prevaricate than giving a straight out answer and hide from the answer. But in that formula, there is the challenge. Whenever you are engaged in society, which we are, there's the negative, leaving aside that particular dramatic case, unique to somebody with a mental health issue, then what about engagement, just general in non-Jewish society? It has to affect you. Anyway, so says Ramat Asiyahu. The Rambam saying it's impossible not to be affected by your environment. It is so much ingrained, embedded in the DNA of each and every one of us. It's impossible to escape from this. It's a vortex. It just sucks you in. V'im ya'ara hadavar shemishahu yatzliach liyas tzadik al afasi v'avara arhu yochid yotzim nekal. And if you find somebody who is able, which of course was the Imanas, and tomorrow, of course, or tonight is the Yotzai of Rochel Yimenu, as Rashi says there, these tzaddikim lived in a family of tzaddikim and were not mushpa, were not affected by that environment. That makes them absolutely superhuman. That's literally above the human condition. And if I turn over to Ramatzasiel, he says the following thing: that the purpose of the Yevonim, I think we did say this last week, the purpose of the Greeks was to inject their philosophy, their outlay, their culture into Judaism. And interestingly, they did not let the Romans destroy the temple. They wanted to incorporate the temple, the base of Mikdash, into their society so that it would carry on, instead of giving a positive influence to the Jewish people, give a negative influence to the Jewish people. So much so that they would be totally and utterly destroyed. Okay.
That was the goal?
That was the goal. So, yes,
The goal is to destroy the Jewish people?
They didn't mind us physically. I saw my Chavruza told me something very interesting. This is Ramatzasiel. Of course, Ramatzasiel's predecessor was Rav Nosson Bachsvogel of Lakewood. I tried to get his Sefer in Chanukah. I don't have it. I've got swearing on other things, but I don't have it. Lekut Rishimus is the name of the Sefer. And he says something very, very interesting. Chazal say that the writing of Esther was the last act of prophecy, the last book of a prophetic book. Right? Why not Hanukkah is the question. And of course, there's a contrast between Hanukkah and Purim. When it comes to Purim, then it was the Nazis, and it was a complete destruction of Klal Yisrael. Now that's not the only such. I mean, they talk about Haman as being, a Hitler, or a blueprint of Hitler, a precursor of Hitler is the word I'm trying to look for. But there have been many such, Hitlers through Jewish history. But they are the complete destruction of Klal Yisrael it's the exception as opposed to the rule. Would you agree historically? But Hanukkah, he says, why was there not a book written, a Sefer Hanukkah? Because there's no end to Hanukkah. It's not a story with a fixed ending that marks a fixed period. The Hanukkah, the ongoing process of Jews being seduced by non-Jewish society, and often, like the Mizyavnim, the Jews who became Greeks, taking up arms in support of the oppression of the Jews by their enemies. What I say in one of my articles is coming out soon, the un-Jews. These un-Jews, that's the process that carries on. And the process of making a Jew into an un-Jew is totally corrosive. There's only the imahas, the obas, who can live in such environments and just not being affected by it. It's quite an astonishing thing. Rabbi Desta.
Did it not affect them?
Sorry?
Did it not affect them?
No, Rabbi Desta says very brilliantly, and I've told you it's a million.
Last week you mentioned it did. Did you know?
I can't remember last week. What was last week? What was happening last week? Who can remember that? We've talked a million times about
Moshe, we spoke about Moshe with Yisro.
So that's where we're.
Gershom,
Coming to it. No, don't worry. If that's what I said, good, because
yeah.
that's what I'm coming to in depth here.
The son of Gershom,
right,
was a priest for Bethlehem.
Oh yeah. We got to that. Oh, very good. That's right. So let's go a little bit further. So I'm sure this is where I'm writing in my incredibly sophisticated board. Don't worry, Klein. We're going to get see this in a minute. Ram and Raz again. Good. I'll show you. Oh, you can see it. It's quite good. Ra and air. Hebrew word for evil. Ra. Opposite. Everybody says toy. Rabbi Dessel says no. Opposite of resh ayin is ayin resh. Right? You can go. It's air means to awaken. It's a catalyst, awakening up. Okay. We've talked about this many times. That somebody can be in an environment which is utterly negative, but to use that as a springboard to catapult you in precisely the opposite direction. So the examples he cites is Avram Avinu. Why do we say in the Haggadah, Mitkila of Avodah Zarah Avosina? Why do our forefathers worship of Avodah Zarah. Who's that? Terach. Terach Abi Avram. Look, we don't go back to Terach. We go back to Avram. He's the beginning of he's the progenitor. Thank you. He's the first Jew. And then he says, and what about a Klal Yisrael in preparation for getting the Torah? Where did Hashem put us? Not in Bnei Brak, not in Borough Park or Stamford Hill, if you're watching this in London. No, he put us in Mitzrayim, a bloody exile where Pharaoh slaughtered 2,000 Jewish babies every morning, every evening. And again, it was so corrosive that 4/5 decided to stay in Mitzrayim. Or Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest Jew who ever lived, where did he have his skinnach? Bound to the lap of a man who thought he was a god. And the last example he gives is Ruth, the mother of the Mashiach. She comes from Moab, the most disgusting, say Chazal, of all the nations. They began from incest and boasted about that in their title, Moab from my father. Lot and his daughters. Yeah, incest, no problem. Could God not have found a nice frum girl, from the 5 towns, to carry the seed of the Mashiach in her womb? He had to go to Moab. And so he says the answer to all these is the same thing. The opposite of Ra is air. That you can totally, that is an interesting thing. So many of the greatest of Klal Yisrael changed and went in the exact opposite direction from where they came from. Think of Rocha Bazaina. How many Jewish kings, high priests, and Cholda Hanaviyah are direct descendants of Rocha Hazaina? Klal Yisrael is full of people who went in the opposite direction, took the wrong turn into change. So yes, you can actually reject totally your background and not be affected by it. It's a similar idea when you do when you become a Baal Tshuva. Every Avera becomes a mitzvah, right? If you do it from Tshuva from Ahava. How does that work? For a very simple reason, because the Avera, you were repulsed, you allowed yourself to be repulsed by it, and therefore it became the springboard to go in the opposite direction. So it invests it with a kedusha, with a holiness. So I didn't remember we got to that stage last week. So Rabbi Dessler indeed says, because I remember struggling. So remember we said that Moshe Rabbeinu runs away. Vayol Moshe l'shev says Isha. Moshe decides to live with the man, to stay with the man. And the man is Yisrael. And why was he staying with him? Because he saw the greatness, the seeds of greatness within him, and therefore he wanted to be mashpia on him, and he wanted to bring him to the realization, the fulfillment of the potential that he had, which, interestingly, he never did. That's an interesting thought. When, despite everything that happened, and despite having Moshe Rabbeinu as your private tutor for 40 years, I'm teaching a young man twice a week at the moment, a lovely young man, really enjoying it. Teaching Gemara, Cholas Lvovos, Rabbi Dessler, and the Alshach. I don't think you get better than that. Anyway, so just for so he's got me, incredibly modest Rabbi Rubenstein, as his personal tutor. I hope I'll have an effect on him. But no matter how good I think I am, humbly. But Moshe Rabbeinu is known as Moshe Rabbeinu, the teacher. That's his title, par excellence. He's the pedagogue. He's the educator. And 40 years with him as your private Rebbe, nada. Zip, klum, garnished. Incredible. He chose himself to, as it were, take the final step. All that from Moshe Rabbeinu didn't actually have that effect on him, which is an incredible thing. But Moshe sees the potential. He certainly built the foundations for Moshe to take, for Yisro to take that final step. Vayol Moshe l'sheva says that Isha, Moshe was happy to live with the man. And now, because I prepared this beforehand, that's the sort of treatment you get in this year. It's Shoiftim Yud Zayin Yud Aleph is almost the exact same posuk which Avi was mentioned before. Vayol HaLevi l'sheva says that Isha. Exact same posuk. And the Levi was content to live with the man. Who was the Levi? That was Moshe Rabbeinu's grandchildren. So if it is so insidious that even Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest Jew who ever lived, is going to be affected by the effects of your environment, if, as the Rambam says, unless you're somebody who's a Superman, which incidentally even the Supermen were affected, like Moshe Rabbeinu, to some degree, then how on earth can we ever escape this? It's a big question. If the greatest Jew who ever lived is going to be affected negatively by his environment, then what chance for Yehudi and Rubenstein, Chaim Gettlers, how are we going to get out of this stuff? If there was no way out of it, then I suppose we really want to, it would ultimately mean that we were stuck. Klal Yisrael would never be able to perform its role of inspiring the world. Instead of being affecting the world, we would be affected by it. Individuals, you and I in New York or wherever we are based, are going to be affected by New York, but it hasn't affected me in the slightest. Everybody is going to be affected by our environment.
It's the game to create incremental positive change. There's still a net sum game.
That's a very, very important point. I love the fact you used incremental. Let's just, wherever you're going, change is always incremental. It's almost always incremental. I mean, some people do change in an instant. So the Gemara Avodah Zarah talks about Rebbe Loza ben Dordoy, who did change dramatically because of one incident, and we've talked about that in our sharing before.
Yeah.
It's just that I tend to miss out the fact that he dies as a consequence. Yeah. So you really want it to be incremental. You want to grow slowly and surely. But there is a solution to this, or at least there's certainly, if we can't escape it completely, we can certainly mitigate and minimize the worst effects of this. And it's in the story of Yosef Atzadik. And again, this is Rabbi Dessler, this is not me. So Rabbi Dessler carries on and he says, so Yosef Atzadik is, he is in an environment which is utterly and totally negative. Now, I saw in Ramat Zion as something which is, I thought it was absolutely fabulous. I can't remember if it's him. Let me quickly look at my notes. If it's honest, no, I can't. I think he gets it from Sefer Das Chacham Musa, in which case it would be page Shin. But listen to this idea, it's incredible. Remember when Yosef is taken as a purchase by Ashes Potiphar, it says that he sees that God is with him. And Rashi says they're an astonishing thing. Listen to this. What did he see how did he see that God was with Yosef? Because Yosef was always talking to him. Yosef was always talking to God. This is astonishing. The Chofetz Chaim, my Rav, the Gitzad Rav, I was just writing about today, incidentally, his Rebbetzin passed away last week. And so his son, Naftali, is writing the what do you call it when you put obituary, thank you, in the Yatad Ne'eman. So he sent it to me for editing, which I was very proud to be a part of, which I happily did, which of course caused a cascade of warm and wonderful memories of both the Rebbetzin and my Rav. But my Rav told me that the Chofetz Chaim, he used to talk to himself, and he used to say, Yisrael Meir, I'm very disappointed in you. Yisrael Meir, how could you do such a thing? Yisrael Meir, yeah. But other Gedolim, and the Alshuk says you should talk to your Neshama. Say, look, Neshama, you and me are in this together. We can do this. We can beat the physical side, etc. But ultimately, the best person to talk to is Hashem himself. Talk to Hashem himself. And Rashi says that's what Potiphar saw in Yosef, that he said Hashem's always with him. He's always speaking to God. Right? Why was he doing that? So as Ramat Zion says, in quoting Rabbi Yerucham, he was trying to minimize the effects of being there. Moshe Rabbeinu also tried to minimize the effects of being with Yisrael. That's why he chose as his career to be a shepherd. Shepherds are away from society. It's just them and God. As I wrote in this week's wonderful column in Indian magazine, in Ahmadiyya, my column, the interesting thing was when I went to Cancun for Sukkot, just let that slip in Mexico. If people don't know what Cancun is. So the interesting thing was that everybody had gone there. The 300 people, Jews that were there, they were trying to, it was sort of like they needed to recharge the batteries and get away from the lockdown, the solitary confinement of being home. And of course, that didn't quite work out because we were hit by a tropical storm and then a hurricane, which meant we were stuck in their, in your room. The thing is, if you want to get away from it, and Shem doesn't want you to get away from it, you're not going to get away from it. Sorry? Rather like Yonah. But he's talked all the time to Hashem, and that's how he minimized the effect of being in that environment. You've got to work on minimizing the effects. So Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be on his own, the opposite of Cancun. Whenever we wanted to be social, as we were saying before, people want to be social. No, Hashem wants you to be, because you know why? As I say in this column, because maybe the message, you know the phrase in Yiddish, mention trachten the Eibishter lacht. I once heard a non-Jewish person And the BBC put it like this: if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Which I thought was very good. So let's all go to Cancun, luxury hotel, and have a really great time. No, I'm going to send along, 2 hurricanes, and you'll be stuck in your room and you're not allowed to get out. And if the windows are blown out in your room, then go into the toilet, go into the bathroom, because that's the safest place to be. No windows there. That's sort of like laughing up there. But maybe the message is, I want you to be alone with me. I want you to focus on your relationship with me. That's what you have to be dealing with at the moment. Maybe that's the big message to Clan Yisrael. Could well be. And in fact, in that Agudas Yisrael webcast, or whatever they want to call it, I mentioned before, several of them said exactly that. Maybe we should be focusing on our relationship with God. Moshe chose to be a shepherd to minimize the effect of Yisro, to focus his relationship with God. Yosef tried to minimize the effect of living with Potiphar by speaking all the time to God. But then, of course, there is the crisis. The crisis is engineered by somebody who decides to change all that, and it's Ashes Potiphar. So, as the Pasuk says, Yosef is incredibly successful. He's incredibly successful in his relationship with his master. He's incredibly successful in his relationship with everybody else in the household. And of course, his attraction and success is certainly noticed by his, I was going to say master or mistress, but, well, that's what she wants to become. And she tries to compromise him many times. And he refuses. And of course, the Pasuk says of Yemo'en, and the musical note over it is the shalshalash, the squiggly, it looks like a lightning bolt or a squiggly worm. And when you read it, it's Yemo'en. He refused. Over and over and over again. But she, of course, we all know the story. She manages to get everybody out of the house, and then she compromises. She's wearing her most seductive clothing, if any, and she's a stunningly beautiful woman. Do you remember when we talked about this before? How did I prove to you that she's an incredibly beautiful woman? How do you know that Ashes Potiphar was stunningly beautiful?
I don't know.
Because Potiphar was incredibly rich.
Yeah.
He was in
Okay.
he was in charge of meat production for the Egyptian Empire. And as I once heard in a documentary in the BBC, somebody from the mafia spokesperson, said that prohibition was a dry run, pun, a dry run for meat. In the 80s, there was a pop group called the Smiths, I think. I knew nothing about them, incidentally. But they were, one of their albums, I think, had the front cover. I know this from my university students, which said "Meat is murder." That was a big deal.
Vegan?
Yeah, whatever they were. But the point is, and whoever they were, but the point is that whether meat is murder or not is maybe a matter for debate. But meat being money is not a matter for debate. Which is why in Fiddler on the Roof, which is a movie I know nothing about, the young woman is her father wants, so Tevye wants his daughter to marry the butcher, who's about 4 times her age and extremely, obese and stuff like that. But he's rich. Why is the butcher? Meat equals money. So he's incredibly rich. He's in charge of meat production for the Egyptian Empire. Take that, mafia. Right? And it's just a strange, interesting historical phenomenon that incredibly rich men, even if they're 90 years of age, end up married to stunningly beautiful women who are aged about 22. Right? So she's very beautiful. She tries to get him, and she nearly succeeds. And at the last moment, when he's about to give in, despite all the VMOs that we talked about, Chazal was about to give in, when something occurred that stopped him in his tracks, which was what? He saw his father looking in the window. He saw his father looking in the window. And because of that, he ran away, he didn't commit adultery, and he's given a title for this. He's called Yosef HaTzadik. Why is he a tzaddik? Because he didn't commit adultery with this other man's wife. But his father was looking in the window. His father was looking in the window. Could you conceive of committing adultery with your father watching from the window? I'll never tell you the story about I was once, many years ago, I was giving a shiur. I was doing a Friday night student thing in Manchester. And after I finished my talk, then those people, schmoozing for an hour or so. And then I went walking back to where I was staying, which was a 45-minute walk through the centre of Manchester. And I walked what was through an area, gosh, I forgot the name. The nickname was the Curry Mile. The Curry Mile. Restaurants, Mr. Roddick. I've forgotten the name of the road, gosh. And it was just, kosher halal, usually halal, restaurants on either side of the road for about, I think, half a mile. Whatever. Anyway, so basically I was walking along and I walked past a restaurant, and there in the window, in the glass front, was a table with 4 of the students I'd been speaking to in my talk Friday night just a few hours before. And I saw them. Now, this is what happened. I just looked away, right? But it was interesting to their reaction. They all sort of saw me. One started to slide underneath the table like this. One picked up the menu. The other two sort of, it was, okay. Now, that's what actually happened, and I just walked on. But imagine, being Scottish, imagine I storm into the restaurant and I say, David, Shmuel, what would be called David, Shmuel? Mark, and John, and might be called Sarah, and Leah. I can't think of anglicized usually. Kosher, Traith. I take the plates of curry, I throw it against the wall. I pick the 4 students up, not the girls, and I throw them out the door. And word of this spreads like wildfire through the Jewish student community of Manchester. And they all turn around and say that David and, well, sorry, it wasn't David, what were they called? Mark and David, or what was it called? John, Mark and John, good, sounds like the New Testament. Mark and John and the 2 girls are tzaddikim, are saintly. Why? Because they didn't eat the curry. What do you mean they didn't eat the curry? The curry's wallpaper. How could they eat the curry? And Yosef Tzaddik isn't tzaddik because he didn't commit adultery. But this woman, his father was looking in the window. Could anybody conceive of committing adultery with your father watching through the window? So, as Abby hinted, it's not that Yaakov Avinu was there. Yaakov Avinu was not there. It's just that when he was confronted by a visual image which he knew was incredibly toxic and would destroy him if he kept focused on it, he pictured a counter image. He conjured up a positive image in the same way that Yosef Tzaddik before had spoken to God all the time, in the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu kept away from Yisrael as much as possible, except when he needed to interact with him. When you're faced with a negative, you have to create a positive. As the Rambam says, in order to get rid of a Chilul Hashem, or the commentators, I should say, in the Rambam, then make a Kiddush Hashem. So if it is that if you're at the Madrega of Rachel and Rivka, etc., that you can live in a negative environment without being affected by it, well, bully for you, fantastic. Wow, you're an Ubermensch, you're a superhuman being. I'm not. So the only way that you can possibly counteract the effects of the poison is by a counterpoison, or whatever it's called. There's a name for something that cures a poison. I can't remember what it is. Yeah, it's more than an antidote, but it's something. There's a name for something that cures a poison. Anyway, an antidote. Yeah, you need an antidote. What's the antidote of living in a non-Jewish environment? Looking at non-Jewish culture, being bombarded by non-Jewish newspapers, etc., etc., etc. Well, immersing yourself in a Jewish environment with people with Jewish values, reading these sorts of books here as opposed to Harry Potter. Well, not so bad. And making the cultural icons of Western society your icons. Because then, if you don't, they will seduce you, they will corrupt you, and they will bleach you of any Jewish content, and you will become, instead of a Jew, an un-Jew. And when the next wave of attacks on the Jewish people who are identifiable as Jews, that's the Jews, not the un-Jews, you'll find the un-Jews there supporting the enemies of the Jewish people because they'll have been absorbed so totally into non-Jewish society as they were in Greece that they too become the enemies of the Jewish people. Now, next week, I'm going to take you on a tour of one of my oldest and favorite shiurim, and we're going to examine the Tower of Babel and what really was going on in the Tower of Babel. Just to give you an exciting thing, a heads up. According to Rabbi Yaakov Enden, if I remember correctly, or was it Rabbi Yonasan Eibishitz, they made the tower in order to be able to launch spaceships.
There's options.
It was a Rabbi Establishment says they made the turn in order to be. Rabbi Establishment, he did not live, after we set foot in the moon, to launch spaceships to go and fight with God. See you next week.
Shkayach. Have a
Take
good
care.
night.